Well, turns out the odds were not in its favour. Now, I'll admit, and I don't think this will be controversial, I was quite surprised when I first heard that The Hunger Games was being adapted to the stage, because it's never been a story I thought would naturally work well there. The track record for this type of expansive story isn't amazing on the stage, and a lot of the way that it builds tension and the brutality of it makes the adaptation better for something like film. Nevertheless, we now have The Hunger Games on stage, currently playing at the Troubadour Canary Wharf, a brand new theatre that cost £26 million to build. So has that investment been worth it? Does The Hunger Games work on stage? Let's find out. But if you haven't seen my face before, hi, I'm Ellie, I talk about theatre. I am the most chaotic theatre person on the internet. I do reviews, I do discussions, I do versus brackets, rankings, game shows, and so much more. And if any of that sounds interesting to you, please consider hitting like and subscribe. It really helps me, it helps the channel. But let's dive in to The Hunger Games on stage. Now, I would do this salute thing where they kiss their hands and hold it up, but it turns out I can't do it. If I put my fingers together like that, my pinky sticks out, and like I can't, even if I like push my thumb to try and hold it in, if I let go, it flicks back out. Like, I don't know what to do here. I can't join the revolution. So, if you somehow clicked on this video, started to watch this review, and you do not know the plot of The Hunger Games, let me catch you up to speed. It would be very weird if you don't, but hey, let's just recap for people who may not be aware. The Hunger Games is based on a book of the same name. Fun fact, I have never seen the film adaptation, but I have read the first book that this stage show is based on, which I can't believe that is the way round I've engaged with The Hunger Games. It's never the case where I've read the book instead of watching the original film, but here we are. This is a young adult novel set in dystopian America. This place, now called Panem, is split into 12 districts, with District 1 and the capital being the most high-class citizens, and District 12 being the lowest-class citizens. Every year, to keep the people in line, President Snow runs the Hunger Games, where 2 teenagers from each district are chosen and forced to compete in a battle to the death, with one rising to the top and being crowned the champion of the Hunger Games. At the 74th Annual Hunger Games, Katniss Everdeen volunteers to take her sister's place after her name is pulled out of the reaping, and we follow her journey through the Hunger Games. Now, I'll say from the top, I was not a huge fan of this stage show. I think there is a lot of elements that it doesn't get right, but I don't think it was an unmitigated disaster. I think there is actually quite a lot here that works, but it depends what you're going into the Hunger Games to get. If you are going into the Hunger Games and you're wanting a spectacle, you're wanting to see really cool moments from the film and the book staged in pretty cool ways, I think you're going to get that. If you are more looking for the adaptation side of things, if you're looking for Katniss to be a really strong and interesting protagonist, if you're looking for an adaptation that does the book justice and really dives into this society and this world and builds that tension, this adaptation is going to be less so for you. It is sad to say, but the adaptation of The Hunger Games is the weakest element here. There's just a lot of choices here that make me a little bit confused at the end of the day, and let's walk through them. First things first, this adaptation was written by Conor McPherson, who, I must admit, is a really strange choice of writer to attach to this project. He is not known for this type of work. Some of Conor McPherson's recent work includes Gough from the North Country, The Weir, and The Brightening Air. He works a lot with the Old Vic, and his writing style often dives into characters. He loves that like old school style of play that is basically very character driven. Even if I dive into his work that I haven't really enjoyed, like something like Girl from the North Country, I can appreciate how he is a really strong writer at character work. He is really good at crafting these three-dimensional characters and putting them on stage and putting them into situations that challenge them. But he always does this from a very naturalistic perspective. These are very human and character-driven struggles that he often explores, so I feel like it's a strange choice to give him this, where you're having to deal with characters' reactions to this very odd and alien world to this audience, where you're having to do all of this world building and all of this exploration of the brutality of this. There's so much here that I wouldn't necessarily pin to Conor McPherson as a writer. He has his strengths in many ways, but it doesn't feel like this is the right project for him. There's certain characters I feel like he does a little bit stronger than others. I actually quite enjoy his adaptation of the more larger-than-life characters, like Caesar Flickerman or Effie Trinket, these products of the capital in District 1. But in a surprising twist, and something I wouldn't actually expected, I feel like it's a lot of the character work that leaves a bit to be desired here. A lot of these characters feel a little bit misrepresented, and quite often I struggle to really root for them. I think one of the biggest examples of this is Katniss herself. Katniss Everdeen is a really interesting protagonist, even in terms of her sacrifice of herself, basically, to help her sister, to the way she reacts to this world and these moments, and the way that she keeps herself alive for these games, which I don't think this adaptation does a very successful job at presenting. She feels a lot weaker here, and I don't feel like I understand this version of Katniss as I did the version from the book. There's almost like a mellowness to her on stage, which I don't think is quite right. But on top of that, a lot of our development of Katniss and the way that we see her from an audience perspective is done through narration. Now, narration is something that can either work really well on stage or really pulls you out of things. Narration is a tool that is often used in theatre, but it tends to work a lot better in non-naturalistic pieces, because I feel like it creates a certain amount of disconnect, which can work well. Quite over-the-top theatre like Amelie and Benjamin Button are great examples of narration that is done quite effectively, where you're not dealing with realism or naturalism, and you're kind of taking yourself out of that. What I think this narration does and really, really weakens is this world building. Now, obviously, most of the people in this audience are going to know the world. Most of the people in this audience are going to understand the gist of things. But one of the most important elements of the Hunger Games is that brutality. It is horrific. If you actually think about the Hunger Games as a real thing, and you start to really dive into it more and more and more, and actually think, okay, if this was an actual thing that was happening, this would be terrifying. At such a young age, to be just thrown into this completely different world, especially if you're coming from a district like District 12, being thrown into the capital, being suddenly pushed into this spotlight by these people obsessed with the idea of you and not you as an actual person, to being judged on your abilities and your speed and agility that you haven't been allowed to practice or prepare for at all. Paraded around and dressed up and mocked and belittled and laughed at. Like, the more you think about this, the more horrific it is. And I feel like there's an adaptation of the Hunger Games that could really, really highlight that. I don't think this adaptation manages to do that at all. And one of the reasons I think it doesn't do that is because of this narration. We're just kind of being told everything. We're told what age you are when you're put into the Hunger Games. We're told this and that and the other. But there's very little moments in this play where we actually see it fully. And what this does, it creates a disconnect and never fully presents to the audience how horrifying this concept actually is. And without that impact, there's so little to understand from an emotional perspective from this piece. I can't dive into these characters and how they're feeling. I can't dive into the brutality of this world and the world building, because so much of it is just being told to me instead of actually being able to see and fully grasp and understand the horror of this world. It does a disservice to the world building, it does a disservice to Katniss as a protagonist, because a lot of her narration is just very matter of fact, which I understand because that's the world that she knows and everything. But I think most of all, I understand why they've gone with it, because that's how the book is told. But the thing is, a book can take a lot of time. A book can take a hell of a lot of time to tell a story from a first-person perspective and allow you to get every single little bit of detail from that story, so you can really, really put yourself into that place. But I don't think the narration in this version does that same thing. I think it misses that effect. But the biggest flaw, the biggest thing about this adaptation that really, really left me disappointed is the way that it really struggled to build the actual tension. I've touched on this a little bit, because I do think the narration is one of the reasons why it doesn't manage to do this, but the thing about the Hunger Games, and when you read it, and I've heard from certain people as well that you do get this effect when you're watching the film as well, is that you start to picture yourself in those games. And the more and more you see of the games, you put yourself more and more into these characters' shoes. And as the games go on and more tributes fall, you feel that tension rising, the danger that these contestants are in, and I don't think this adaptation does a very good job at translating that. Maybe part of that is from reading the book and watching the adaptation and going, okay, I know who's going to live and who's going to die. But I don't even think that's a good enough excuse, because there's so many pieces of theatre where I know how it ends, and I still get completely and utterly wrapped up in the journey of it. It is so unbelievably important to have that tension in the Hunger Games, because you need to feel for each of these characters. You need that tension to build up this drama. You should feel stressed. You should feel terrified for these characters. You should feel every single little bit of emotion that these characters are feeling in that arena with them. And I don't think this adaptation quite captures that as well as you feel that with the book. Take a moment, like, spoilers for a book that came out, 20 years ago? I don't even know. But Rue's death. This is a moment in the play that is meant to be so stressful. It's meant to be the most emotional moment. A character who is so young. A character who is so innocent and so warm and has such a lovely relationship with Katniss suddenly having her life taken away. It's tragic. But on stage it happens so quickly? It's honestly like a blink and you'll miss it thing. And I know there's an element of shock that I won't have from that moment, but there's ways to capture that. As I said, okay, take Hadestown, for example. I love to cite other pieces of media to analyze media, but Hadestown, right? Every single time I see that moment at the end of Hadestown where Orpheus turns around, I know he's going to do it. I know he's going to turn around. But still, because of the way that they build up towards that moment, with the music, with the stage, with the lighting and everything, coming in towards this one moment where suddenly everything drops. That is a great way to take a moment of heightened tension where I know what's going to happen, but still, the entirety of the stagecraft comes together, so every single time, I am floored, I'm shocked, I'm upset, I'm disappointed, and you are left hoping that maybe this time he will not turn around. Maybe this time they're going to work out. That is what Rue's death should feel like. You can know it's coming. You can know that this horrific moment is about to happen. But it's the way that the story is lined up and you bring in that stagecraft and the text and everything to build up to that moment. And I don't think it achieves that. These deaths, a lot of the time in this piece, feel like they're kind of being thrown away. There's very little impact to them. And if you don't feel the impact of these deaths, there's no tension. If you don't feel the impact of these deaths, you don't understand that these are children. The youngest person in this arena, it's 13? That is brutal. And I don't think you feel that. And I don't get emotionally wrapped into these characters, and I don't get emotionally wrapped into this story. That should really really be impactful. The adaptation and the story here is by far the weakest element of the Hunger Games. It leaves a lot to be desired. And it's a shame because there's moments here where I can see what Conor McPherson is going for with this adaptation, and I can see moments where he does kind of get it right. There's a lot of characters here that I actually do think he illustrates quite well, like Haymitch, like Peter. But I think a lot of the elements that make Hunger Games work, like this tension, like Katniss as a protagonist, don't click. Let's next talk about the staging. Now, Matthew Dunster, as the director, had a very tall task ahead of him when adapting this to stage, because as I said, this is a story that doesn't naturally translate, and I think there are real peaks here, and there's real valleys. It's kind of a mixed bag. As I said before, I think if you're looking for Hunger Games to be a spectacle, I do think you're going to get that. It is impressive what they managed to do in this arena. What I will say on the whole, though, is that I think that really settles and really has its moments more so in Act 2, during the actual Hunger Games, rather than Act 1. Act 1 is very much centred on the world building, on going into District 1, in how Katniss and Peter are kind of paraded and interviewed and dressed up. Whereas it's within the actual games where they actually get to really play their hand a lot more. First of all, fight choreography, I really, really enjoyed. I think it's hard because you want to show how, hungry these guys are, for a lack of a better word, I guess. How they are hungry in these Hunger Games. But these are children who are fighting for their lives, essentially. I like how a lot of them have a very different fighting style, how some of them are a little bit more scrappy in their movements, how you have the children from District 1, 2, 3, and 4 who have kind of been trained for the Hunger Games all their lives, so they're much more professional and strict and firm in their movements. I like the training sessions where they're fighting with these sticks, although it does look a little bit like Mulan. They've got these big sticks, let's get down to business. Ha! But as much as I like the actual fight choreography, there is also the other choreography. They have a strange choice where they bake a lot of dance into the piece alongside this fight choreography. And there are some places where admittedly it does actually work, but there's a lot of places where it feels very out of place and really takes you out of it. It's another thing that cuts a lot of this tension, unfortunately, is within this staging. It kind of delivers a bit of a mixed response and can sometimes make it feel a little bit out of place. I think one of the weirdest examples of this is partway through the games. It's the moment after they've gone back to the cornucopia partway through the games to get the items that they desperately need. You see all of the dead tributes from that point rise up on the middle platform, and they've kind of Michael Jackson themselves into the ground. You know how Michael Jackson had the shoe that he implanted himself into the ground so he could do the lean during Billie Jean? These tributes are there and they're kind of swaying in each direction with their feet embedded into the ground. I think the best way for me to do it is to show you. See, this is why I have this space behind me so I can do this. So they're embedded into the ground and they're just kind of swaying like this. Kind of going up and around. Obviously they can go much further and make it more like that because their feet are embedded into the ground. But they do look a little bit like those wacky inflatable arm tube men who do that. And I'm sorry, that was so funny. That was so unbelievably funny. I was laughing at something that should feel really impactful and really tense. You're partway through these games. You've got this moment where Katniss sees the dead body of her beloved friend who was guiding her through all of these dead people that she knew. This should be horrific, but I can't stop laughing because they look like wacky inflatable tube men. Another moment of this comes in the first moments of Act 2 when the alarm goes off and the Hunger Games start. We get the first battle at the cornucopia, and there are moments of this that look utterly brutal. There's people screaming, there's stabs, there's fights breaking out here, there, left, right, everywhere. spanning all across this stage space. And when it actually is in the middle of those fights, you can feel a lot of that tension. That's where it kind of builds quite well. You can see them falling to the ground, you can hear them scream, and you get a lot of that brutality. And then that's completely cut by them standing back up, running into a diamond formation, and starting to do this weird running dance. It doesn't blend amazingly well. These two very different ways to handle this don't always combine. And often it takes something that should feel really horrific and makes it a little bit comedic. I don't think these have the impact that the director or the choreographer often wants. But I understand this kind of choreography a lot more for the people within the capital. They are quite often presented a lot more over the top and wacky. So even though it's not the greatest thing in the world, like the stylist doing a weird kind of pony dance, like I can understand that. Or their kind of party sequence partway through the games. I think those are a much better way to contrast the choreography and the actual happenings within the games, where you see this violence contrasted immediately with this lavish life that they get to live. So while not perfect, I can understand the choreography a lot more there, or even the more subtler moments of choreography. During Katniss's opening monologue, we see all of the citizens of District 12 kind of walking and moving in these very strict and slow movements. There's a lot of very strict choreography there that you wouldn't often very much associate being choreography. But it starts to create that picture of District 12 and the people there and how worn down a lot of them are. So there are moments where this choreography can have the correct impact, but there's also moments where it completely cuts tension, where it comes off with the wrong emotional impact from the audience. Especially in these moments where we need to really be feeling how terrifying this is, but instead I'm laughing because they look like wacky inflatable tube men. Now, I'm going to speak a little bit about design. I think a lot of the things I want to speak about from a design perspective can sometimes link into staging, so I'm going to kind of blend the two topics together now. Kind of go between the two a little bit more. Let's speak about this stage. We are in this custom-built arena, and actually something that really worked well is how they laid out the audience. There's technically 4 different ways that they stage the piece. They start in the round, and then the 2 sections that are District 1 and 2 kind of move slightly. I think the best way to describe it is to draw it. So these sections here kind of close off and you've got some screens up there, but these kind of go backwards. These ones go back to here. These ones go back and these ones go back. So it becomes one line of seating here and here. So you can stage things in traverse. And sometimes only these sections will go back and leaving these sections. So you can kind of stage it in thrust, and the same on this side. So you end up having 2 different ways to use it as thrust seating, one traverse and one in the round, which allows them a lot of really good flexibility within the piece. I actually kind of prefer it when it's traverse or thrust because the space feels a lot bigger in those moments. It allows them to achieve things like the chariot passing by and to bring in additional set pieces from off stage. I think when it's in the round, it feels a lot more intimate, which I do think works for moments, but especially when you're within the games, you want to feel how huge that space actually is. I think the scale of it works very well. There's a lot of really cool ideas within the design. When they do the tracker jackers, these are done with these kind of flashing lights that are held by the cast members, kind of throwing them all around themselves to kind of simulate these bugs instead of actually seeing them. A nice simple way to present them on stage and a really creative way to get around that. I think there's a lot of elements where they do have some really fun creative ideas within the design of the piece. Another great one is the lighting rigs that come down to become the trees, with Katniss kind of putting on a harness around her to climb up. These rising down and tilting at different angles, and even at certain moments catching fire, which does actually build tension quite well. There are points where the stage can feel quite empty, but this is helped to be alleviated by set pieces that are risen up from the middle of the stage. in the center, you may have witnessed on my little drawing, there was like an oval shape. That oval shape dips completely down, sinks to the very bottom of the stage, and can rise up these huge set pieces, such as the train or the hotel rooms they stay in. It brings in the final structure for the final moments of the games. I do think they play their hand with this a little bit too early. The very first moments of the piece, we see Katniss rise in on top of this, which I feel like is a little bit too technological to start with, especially as we start the piece in District 12, obviously. I feel like it would have been a little bit more impactful if we had waited to reveal that middle rise until we actually reach the train, until we actually reach these moments where we're going into District 1. I feel like it would have been a cooler moment to reveal it then, rather than at the very start of the piece, where it kind of feels a little bit unthematic. Another little piece of design work I don't love is the screens they use. These feel like they're kind of hit and miss. They make a creative choice in this version to, instead of showing like the faces of the dead tributes, just show the numbers from the districts they're from, which I do feel like makes it a little bit harder to track throughout the piece who's actually passed away, especially when you've got a little bit less time to dive into it. It kind of feels like you want to know exactly who has gone in the games. I understand the reason they probably haven't done this is because we don't have 24 tributes actually on stage at the same time, I don't believe. I think we've cast slightly under that, because, I mean, most of them pass away within the first couple of minutes, so it's understandable. But surely there was a room for, I don't know, hire a model for one day to get a photo of them so you can have it on the screen at some point, just so we can put a face to who has passed away and follow it a little bit closer than I feel like just showing the numbers allows us to do. But I think there's a real cool factor to how they stage this piece. I think it's undeniable that this is a spectacle. It's clearly got the budget, it's clearly had the thought, but what I will say as a general note is that it does feel like a lot of the design work from this version feels like it's in the film's shadow. This isn't just from like a design point of view in a case of like set and costume, but also in like the audio design. There's a lot of songs and motifs and ideas that feel like they're lifted directly from that film. All of the Capital costumes and the District 1 costumes and that sense of style and everything, it feels very much in line with what that film did. And I feel like this stage show almost lacks its own identity as an adaptation in its own right, because I feel like so much of it is borrowing from that film. I want to see what these creatives are thinking of. I want to see what these creatives are taking inspiration from and bringing in. I want to see their fingerprints and their ideas of the Hunger Games, and not have to be kind of bogged down with how it's been done in the most popular adaptation. I understand there are definitely going to be some elements that you would like to borrow from those adaptations when you're adapting something, especially if it is as popular as those film adaptations are. But I feel like this version kind of lacks its own identity as much as other adaptations of popular mediums like this have. So yeah, I feel like on the whole, there's a lot to enjoy about the staging, and I do think they do a great job at bringing a lot of these elements that I didn't think they were going to bring to stage well, and managing to make them effective and impactful. But there's little hang-ups here and there, but on the whole, I'm a lot more positive than I am on the actual adaptation of it. Finally, let's speak about this cast. Now, I'm going to start by speaking about the one casting choice that they are pushing this play on. If you walk into Liverpool Street at the moment, literally on my way to see the show, I came onto the Lizzie line from Liverpool Street. If you go through there, you see these advertisements everywhere. The one thing that they are advertising the show on, basically, is it's the Hunger Games on stage and the fact that John Malkovich is playing President Snow. Now, they are very clear on these advertisements that he is just playing it on screen. Malkovich has pre-recorded some lines, and actually, I don't think the idea is bad. President Snow is kind of this omnipresent threat a little bit. He doesn't have loads of interactions with the characters, and he's not a huge character in this book that they're adapting. He's a lot more present in the next couple of books, but this one specifically, it actually makes a lot of sense to do it like this. I think the idea is solid, but oh my god, John Malkovich did not want to do it. I love John Malkovich. I think he is an incredible actor. He has given his all to many, many roles. If you have seen Of Mice and Men, if you've seen Being John Malkovich, you know what this actor can do. And so when you see his performance in this, you know that he did not want to do it. This is by far the worst performance of the year, and he pre-records like 4 scenes. He is dreadful. And like, it's very rare I'm this brutal, but I cannot undersell how painfully bad he is. There is absolutely no emotion in his voice. He's giving these backstories and these moments where he's speaking about his granddaughter and his fear about Katniss being this symbol of rebellion. And there's just no emotion behind it. You feel absolutely nothing. It is the most phoned in performance I have ever seen, and it's literally being phoned in. I don't know if he's not been paid enough. Some people said that it was like he had a gun to his head, but I mean, if he had a gun to his head, at least he would have had some emotion on his face. And granted, his performance does get a little bit better throughout the show. His final scene with Katniss at least has some kind of emotion, but my lord, it was bad. It was painfully bad. And it's made worse by the fact that I know how good of an actor John Malkovich is, and I know how perfect he is cast as President Snow. This is such a perfect John Malkovich role, and yet he doesn't even give it 10%. But it's also the case of, this is all pre-recorded. Did they do one take and give up? Was this the best takes he got? Did they have 5 minutes to record it on his lunch break? Disappointing is an understatement here. Oh god. But hey, at least the cast who are actually in the room are a lot better. First up we have Meir Carragher, who plays Katniss. I think she is a little bit imperfect as Katniss. I think she's missing a little bit of bite and hunger that I want to see in Katniss. I think sometimes her reactions of the brutality around her leave a little bit to be desired. But I do think she does well at these kind of action hero moments. These moments of very heightened danger, I think she does present a lot of the impact on Katniss through those moments, where she's climbing up these trees and you see the fire burning beneath her. I think the relationship with Rue is really well developed. So there's moments where I wanted a little bit more out of the performance, but moments where I think she definitely captured Katniss well. Ewan Garrett plays Peter, who I think gives a really good performance here. Peter has a really interesting arc in the show, where you're not quite sure whether to trust him or not. It's not easy to make these quite big shifts believable and grounded, but I think Garrett does a great job at giving you all of these different layers of Peter, from Loverboy Peter to Traitor Peter. A really great grounded performance here. Another performance I really loved was Joshua Lacey, who plays Haymitch. Haymitch is a really interesting and tragic character, and I think he's presented really well here. The trauma that he feels and these moments where he's struggling. He's clearly drinking a lot to forget and hide behind it, but he clearly has a strong love and care for these 2 tributes he's taking under his wing. He wants them to survive, and you can clearly see the weight that he feels behind having to train up all of these tributes of past games and just watching them die and die and die and die again. The more you think about what Haymitch has gone through, the more tragic it is. And even if the play doesn't always explore that or leaves it kind of more in the air as subtext, you feel that really deeply and truly through Joshua Lacey's performance here. And there's some great supporting performances across the board here. Some highlights for me personally are Tasman Carroll as Effie, who is wonderfully over the top in camp. Tristan Waterson as Gale. a very close friend to Katniss, and their relationship is really interesting to watch play out, while Katniss is in the games and whilst she is out. Demetraki. Stavros Demetraki. And Stavros Demetraki, who plays Caesar Flickerman. He has so much presence on stage. The way he bounces off of these tributes is really fun. And I think it's really, really cool to see. And I think it's one of those moments in this play that actually do present the horrific nature of it, is seeing him present this show and be all upbeat and happy and campy, and the way that the tributes are just so shy and in themselves and like knowing what their fate is, and still beyond it he is presenting this full-on like fake smile, joy and happiness and everything to present this show where the underlying nature is that they're all about to fight to the death. So that's what I want more of. That's what I want more of. On the whole, it's hard for me to sit here and recommend The Hunger Games, but I also can't say it's not worth your time at all. Because there's elements on stage that do really work, and a lot of these being elements I didn't think they were going to manage. But on the other hand, a lot of that depth and exploration is really missing here. I can see a world where this could be so much more, an adaptation that could rival the book and the film. But I think the flaws within its adaptation leave me with a much more middling to low opinion on it. It feels like another kind of run-of-the-mill blockbuster adaptation that is trying to do a lot of things, but doesn't always hit with all of them. But what do you think? Have you seen The Hunger Games on stage? What are your thoughts? Whether you agree or disagree with me, let me know in the comments down below. If you did enjoy this video, please consider hitting like and subscribe. It really helps me out, helps out the channel. Here's some links to some other videos on screen right now, and a link to my Instagram if you'd like to drop me a follow over there. And a huge thank you to all of our channel members whose lovely names are on screen right now. But that's it for me today, and I'll hopefully see you next time. Bye!